Welcome to Claim Your Confidence, a podcast that will introduce you to the most powerful people in the world. No matter what obstacles you face, Claim Your Confidence will inspire and motivate you to go after the life you want. Are you ready to claim your confidence?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Claim Your Confidence. I'm Lydia Fenet. I'm coming to you out of Newsstand Studios in Rockefeller Center. It is a glorious day in New York City. We have finally turned into summer. And joining me from Brussels is an incredible woman who, when I talk about the word bravery, when I talk about somebody who's putting herself out there in a big way, but in an incredibly important way, you will understand what I'm talking about. Reah Bravo has joined me. She is the author of a book called Complicit: How Our Culture Enables Misbehaving Men. Reah, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
I have to be honest, when I read the title of this book, it took me aback for a second, and I didn't really know how I felt about it, to be completely honest. We're the same age, and the topic is something, having worked in the corporate world for over 20 years, I definitely thought about a lot post Me Too. And I first and foremost want to commend you on writing this book. As I was telling you before, I started reading it and immediately was engrossed and could not put it down. But also in taking this opportunity to share such a personal approach to this book, because it really isn't a book where you're blaming people for anything they're doing. You're really taking a look at your life and what you did in your own career and how that affected those around you. So can you tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book? And then I want to start at the beginning of your life.
Okay, sure. Well, inspiration for the book came from a personal essay that I wrote after my former boss, Charlie Rose. I had gone on the record with accusations against him in the first expose that was written in the Washington Post. And then I had a hunch that more accusations were going to follow. And word was spreading that more accusations were going to follow. And for whatever reason, so many women I've spoken to feel the same way. It's really hard to read about yourself in these stories, even as factually correct as they are, even when the reporting is completely ironclad, just something about it, it's hard. And so I didn't really even have an objective. I just insisted on writing a personal essay about kind of what it was like to work for him, and that it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't sideswiped by him, is what I write in the essay. It was like it was a slow process by which I just completely did not respond in these situations the way that I would have anticipated. Anyway, that essay went on to generate interest in a book. And I was at the point of time in my life where I felt very uniquely situated to write it for multiple reasons that we can get into later. And I took it on, not having any concept of how difficult it was going to be to write for so many reasons. I guess you could say I'm a writer by profession. I've written in most of my jobs in various capacities, but I had never before written a book, nor had I done the kind of reporting that was going to be demanded for a book like this, because it's not just my personal story. I really reached out to a lot of other women, and it was during the pandemic, or at least part of it was during the pandemic. So it was a long, arduous journey, but it's finally done.
And we're almost here. That's got to be equal parts exciting and terrifying.
Yes, very much so. You're right.
So let's start at the beginning and tell me what brought you to the place that you are right now. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in New Mexico, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I think I speak for many New Mexicans when I say that it will always be home. That no place else is quite like it.
And what were your parents like?
So my father is a Presbyterian minister, and I wouldn't describe them as overly conservative. It wasn't too strict of a household that I grew up in. I had two older brothers, but there were priorities in the family, and one of those priorities was education. That was an arena where my parents did not skimp. And whatever they needed to do for my brothers and I, they did. And I like to say, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family, but we certainly had everything we needed. And among the things that we had was a remarkable financial aid package for a remarkable private school in New Mexico that we all went to, and that I am always grateful for and always think back on how important that education was.
And what were you like as a child? Were you, I mean, the youngest of 3 kids, 2 older brothers? I mean, it must have been a little rough and tumble around there. I have 2 brothers, so I can say that.
Oh, you do? Okay.
They were always, it was always directed at each other, but somehow I always got set up in the mix.
I think to use some of the language that I would have used in my book, I think growing up, I had a very healthy sense of protagonism. I just really felt, for whatever reason, that I could do anything. And that's not to say that as I became older and became an adolescent and a teenager, it's not to say that I had crazy amounts of confidence, but that I legitimately believed what I think most Gen Xers and women who came of age during the 90s believed, and what we were taught, which is that, the sky is the limit. You can do whatever you want. And while I believe that that is a powerful and it's a positive message, I also think that it can be taken to extremes. And it's also the root of kind of some of our disappointment in life, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And that brought you to the East Coast. You went to UPenn for college, is that correct?
Yeah. So I went to Penn for undergraduate, and I went to Columbia for graduate school. Out of undergrad, I was very kind of social justice, human rights oriented. The young woman who somehow wants to change the world. Now, what changed between then and I would say by the time I finished working for Charlie Rose is a lot of things had set in, which is sometimes the job that you really want to be doing is just financially not feasible when you have taken on ridiculous quantities of student loan debt.
Yes.
And if you want to live in a city like New York. So after Columbia, I went straight from Columbia into working for Charlie. I had begun as an intern at the show before I took that job, which was very fortunate. I write in the book, despite how horrible the internship was, and despite that I knew it was a horrible place to work, I wanted that line on my resume so badly, and it was my only foot in the door of salaried employment at a time when the economy was not doing well. And by, months after graduation, the financial crisis hit, and I was one of the only few people I knew who graduated with a job, right?
And was it always that you were going to go into a job like that? You wanted to be in media. That was always the aim for you.
Yeah. From what I hear from so many other women I talked to too, who had been, especially those who had been in some sort of investigative journalism or broadcast, it was kind of like this calling that it was something that could really be impactful. So I totally see a through line between, the first job I had out of undergrad was for a human rights organization. And then I had done a Fulbright in the Middle East, and that was focused on, human rights promotion in the context of democratic reforms that had taken place. And to me, Charlie Rose and being able to work on specific news segments was just completely in line with that, right? You're helping to create a narrative, bring attention to certain things. So I didn't think of it as disjointed in any way from my.
It just seemed like the next step for you.
Yeah.
And so you allude in the book too that you kind of heard that it wasn't the greatest working environment before you got there.
Yeah.
But who had you heard that from? Was that just sort of something that was known, or?
It was so, and I laughed about this in numerous interviews I had with former staff members, that they were fighting so hard to get an internship or a job at Charlie Rose, and there was always 1 or 2 people who were like, my friend so-and-so worked there, and I heard it's kind of crazy. And how we all just either refused to believe it, or we had a justification for it because maybe so-and-so you're talking about couldn't cut it. Or maybe so-and-so, it's, you still want to go for it.
That's such an interesting point. The point of, and I don't know if this is a uniquely our generation way of handling it, because I think a lot of us went into our early jobs in our 20s. It was almost like you had to steel yourself. You had to almost come up with a persona that was okay with the things that were being said to you. And, I say to people all the time, I have always used humor to dispel those uncomfortable situations of which over the course of my career, and especially over the course of my charity auctioneering career, where I was out and am still out with people who've been drinking all night. And the things that have been said to me over the years don't even shock me anymore because I'm so used to hearing them. But I think back, and when I was reading your book, I was thinking back, it's amazing how you do almost create this thing and you accept that these are things that you're going to hear, and you almost just think it's like a badge of honor, right? Well, I made it through. That happened to you too, And so it didn't surprise me at all that there were people who were like, well, actually, I don't know that I would work there, or, stay away from so-and-so. That was definitely something I heard over the course of my career. Like, be sure you don't go out too late if that person's around. I mean, it's never that the person who's doing something wrong is doing it. It's always that you have to be careful about it. And that's something you really talk a lot about in your book.
Beyond just being, for some of us, I think, a badge of honor. I write about a lawsuit brought against Charlie by 3 CBS employees, younger females, and how some of my female peers of my generation who I had worked with at the show, made these comments. They were supportive of the 3 women bringing this case forward, but kind of like, did you read what they put up with? It wasn't anything compared to what I had.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, but you scratch a little deeper, and it's not just that it's a badge of honor, but just how much we would feel like a failure were we to have needed to have done something about it. Were we to have needed to have asked for help, right? Yeah. That it's just, weakness is just not celebrated in our culture, or what we perceive as weakness, right? Like I say, no place in the Western canon are people celebrated for opting out or just being like, I don't need this. That's not fair. Or, that's discriminatory. So we just, grin and bear it.
Grin it and bear it. You open your book talking about an exact moment like this, where you are at Charlie Rose's house and his toilet is backed up. And so come hell or high water, you're going to be in charge of fixing that. Can you tell me why you started with that story? Like what were you trying to show the reader and bring them into?
I'm glad. Thank you for asking this question. I appreciate it. Because one of the basic premises of the book is that none of us are in the moment precisely who we think we are, right? Even who we are is a story that we're constantly crafting. Like none of us act with the kind of coherence or consistent moral thinking that we would like to think. And over the course of my reporting for this book, the single thing I heard most from people, the single comment time and again, was some variation of, I always thought of myself as. But, we all think of ourselves according to an ideal, but in the moment, be it a moment with disparate power dynamics, be it a moment where you're just totally caught off guard, a moment where, as a young female, you feel this like almost ghost-like imperative to like maintain the tenor of the relationship. Like we behave in ways that might not align with what we would expect, and we justify it. Like in the aftermath, post hoc, we come up with easy explanations that we can live with, right? Nobody understands our reasoning or why we did things better than we do, because we have all the context necessary, right? We can judge other people, but for our behavior, we have all the context we can need. And in my personal essay that led to this book, I talk about a time when he had hired me to work at his estate in Long Island, organizing a library in his guest house. And like, I knew it was kind of like dubious. I didn't understand like the library me, that's not what I'm trying to get hired to do, but it had been emphasized that one-on-one with the boss was essential to being part of the team. Like you don't say no to that opportunity. It's hard to get, and you don't get hired otherwise, kind of a thing. Yeah. And just looking back, it's just kind of gross, this need, this imperative to be chummy with somebody, right? Yeah. And to prove like, okay, I'm out here to prove that I can get along with him, that we can enjoy our company while I do this work or something, right? And he asked me, I was out at his house working on the library, which by the way, I took the work very seriously. Like I had an Excel spreadsheet, like you could organize it. You could look it up by author, by subject matter, whatever, all these books, and my arms were sore. I was like moving so many books. So not really realizing that I think quite a few people had gone out to work on that library. And I don't know if it was questionably just an excuse for him to have younger female interns hang out at his house. But he asked me, he was in and out of town during my stay at his estate, and he had his toilet clogged in his master bedroom of the main house, and you could smell it if you went upstairs. I mean, it was quite bad. He was telling me, the toilet's clogged, but I'm leaving town. And I was wondering, there was like a pause where he wasn't quite sure, like, could he ask me this? And I immediately was like, okay, like I'll work on it. Like, I got it. And I used this example in the essay that I wrote, and it was cited in a lot of social media and on Twitter and stuff, like, oh, can you believe that he would force a young intern to unclog his toilet? And I wanted to make clear that they knew he did not force me. Like, yeah. I almost sounds crazy. I almost borderline enthusiastically put it out there. And as I explain in the book, I was like so many other women who I've spoken to who worked for misbehaving men, which is that I was more afraid of how people would interpret my own behavior and think that I was somehow using my sex to my advantage than I actually was of the misbehaving man. Like, I was more afraid of what people were going to think of me than anything that Charlie was going to do. And so immediately, once I was off with the plunger upstairs, I messaged a couple different friends on staff, hoping it would spread, that everyone would hear this hilarious story, because I just felt like categorically they would all know how unflappable I was. And I mean, because look, everyone on staff kind of, regarded him as crazy, right? Like, working for this man who could, whether or not they believed his interviews were brilliant, it's just, you separate the work that you do from the man who you do it for. And I just couldn't wait to prove that I was not out at his estate
having an affair of sorts.
Yeah. So
you were down there working, and that's what you wanted everyone to know. And that was the message that
yes.
was proving. Yeah.
And I will say as well about the other reason why I use the toilet, unclogging of the toilet as an example of, we do things that we would never imagine ourselves doing, and then we're able to justify it. But also in my mind, I say that difference between, like, did he force me to unclog his toilet, or did I want to unclog his toilet? And the fact of the matter is I'm actually was so much more comfortable being in that latter camp, because it meant I was in control. It meant that, like, I was the one choosing to do this. And that's how we tell ourselves our stories, right? That's how we look back, or we justify, or we recast things, is that this is I'm doing this out of my own free will. Because that's how unflappable I am. That's how hilarious and insane this is, not how degrading.
And therefore it's okay, right?
Yes.
It's a justification on all parties.
Yeah.
So how long did you work for Charlie Rose in total?
Including the internship and my time as an associate producer, like a bit under 2 years, less than 2 years.
When you were there, was this something that was openly talked about with other women who were in there? Or was it sort of something that people were like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening? Or was this really something that, as revelations started about other people, it became clear that there was going to be a reckoning of sorts for the media types as well?
Yeah, I think that people who worked for Charlie Rose would all answer that question differently. I think it depends in part, like, what, I think certain years were more insanity intensive than other years. I think certain things were known so much more acutely among senior staff, or staff who had been there for a long time, and they talked about it, but they kept things amongst themselves. Young interns first starting out, like, I do think they were kind of left to figure things out on their own, while, getting some guidance here and there, or kind of veiled commentary. But it didn't take long. It didn't take long to figure out. And while we all knew something was going on, and that he had this penchant for younger women, and that he just didn't care about certain things, I don't think we knew the extent of it. And to be honest, I still don't think we do. And I don't mean this about Charlie per se, but anybody who has reported on a quote unquote misbehaving man knows that a lot of the stories out there have not come to light, and that some of the most damning stuff are just, people don't want to put their names on it. Yeah.
When did you decide to come forward with this story? Because this, to me, the whole idea of writing a book after you've been through the sort of first wave of this is incredibly impressive. But I think for me, just the idea of going to the Washington Post and having that conversation and going on record when you know that even though there is the tide of the Me Too movement, there is also the opposite of that, which are all the people who are not interested in having that conversation and don't frankly want things to change and really didn't see it as a big deal and didn't understand why this was all happening. So what did that conversation look like? How did it all come to be?
It's interesting, as different men were, say, I'll describe it as falling from their perches, right, during the Me Too movement. It was really strange because you could almost anticipate, for those of us who had spent any time in the industry, it was like once Mark Halperin's accusations came out against Mark Halperin, some of us messaged each other being like, is Charlie going to be next? Just Mark Halperin happened to have been one of the people who was guests who had made the most appearances on Charlie Rose. And there was just, that's not to say that there's any causation there, but it's just this idea that we felt it coming. And then we had heard that reporters were reaching out to different people we had known on staff. And there was a time early on in the Me Too movement, I can recall a friend who I'd worked with sent me an email, how long till they get Charlie? I'm just kidding. Am I? Question mark. And I'm like, and I responded with like a very honest email, and I was still processing everything that I had gone through, and was like, I can't believe some of the stuff that we laughed about, or some of the stuff that she responded, I can't believe the illegal behavior that I did not think at the time I didn't even consider was illegal. I describe for some women their kind of reprocessing of work environments or encounters with men during the Me Too movement as a mug of ayahuasca, because it's just like you do what you can, you get through it, you have your narrative, or you compartmentalize, and then you revisit it and you see it and you're forced to process it in a way that you had not before, right? So I was processing my experience with Charlie, and it had been something that I had really tried to shut out because, again, as I've said, I just didn't, I had responded and acted the whole time in a way that I would have never, ever expected of myself. And it was early one morning. My husband was rushing out the door on a work trip to Berlin. I was feeding my son breakfast, and I looked at my phone, and I got this message on LinkedIn from Amy Britton, a reporter with the Washington Post, being like, would you, we're looking to speak with people who worked for Charlie Rose. Would you mind if I contact you? And I read it out loud to my husband, and he's like, oh, that's great. You should talk to her, but just make sure you say off the record, not for attribution. He's a journalist, by the way. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. And then I just start crying. I'm standing there in the kitchen, shocking myself that I'm even crying. Like, I don't even know at the time, years and years have gone by. And why am I crying? I don't have to talk to her if I don't want to talk to her. It's just like, I don't know what this is. And suddenly my husband is like, is it okay if I keep running out the door? Like should I say?
Can I go?
But I'm like, no, I'm fine. I think I knew I would talk to her. And I think I felt that I was, from the beginning, that I would wind up going on the record. And it wasn't out of any sense of hatred or spite or resentment. It was out of a sense of kind of obligation that, like, I was a part of something. And it's not just that I was a part of something. It's not just that I was mistreated by Charlie. It's, I was a part of that office. Like, I saw a lot, and like, and I also felt like, if not me, and there were other women too who went on the record in the first expose by name, but at the time it's like, I don't live in New York. I'm across an ocean. Like, I wasn't like super career oriented, or any career or job that I had. This wasn't going to like be a nail in a coffin. And it was just the sense of, would I be able to live with myself if I didn't talk? And I think I would have struggled with that for a very long time. Yeah.
The book is so nuanced. There are so many different layers to being complicit, which you talk about. And one thing that really struck me, even in the first sort of couple of chapters, is how it's not a book, and you just alluded to this, which I thought it would be with the title Complicit, using the word misbehaving and men in the same title. I thought in a way it was going to be a book, like an angry book, like I'm angry about this and all of this thing. It isn't at all. It's really, it's a little bit of an unpacking of this puzzle, right? Mm-hmm. You talk openly about the fact that as white women, we are afforded privileges and in many cases make the excuses for the men that we work with, right? And because of the color of our skin, we are able to get away with more and allow people to get away with more. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
White women and my white identity is threaded throughout the book and comes up a lot. But the chapter specifically that addresses white women, I found to be the most intimidating to write, because I just was like, this is going to fall short. Like, that, just all of the ways in which I exercise something that a woman of color cannot in the workplace. It's like, how do I even do that justice? But I will say one of the ways in which I break it down, the book talks a lot about cultural narratives and how we use narratives to shape our identity, our sense of self, and our role. And when Charlie was inappropriate towards me and towards other white women who I spoke with, we didn't put him in his place, right? We laughed him off. We put up with whatever we put up with. And we had a role to play, right? It's scripted. And I contrast that in the book with a writer who I am a big fan of, which is Rebecca Carroll. She's also a radio host. And she wrote a really wonderful piece for Esquire about what it was like being a Black woman working for Charlie, and just being completely her ideas disregarded, or if she dared pitch a Black guest, that it was like her with her own agenda, right? Whereas I was never criticized for having my own agenda whenever I pitched somebody who was white, or somebody who was in a field I was interested in, right? And Rebecca Carroll does not lament the fact that she was never hit upon by Charlie, but she's explaining that as in an office that had both, sexism and racism at play, she was all but erased, while also, her work being exploited. And another former white colleague who I talked to told me that it took her a really, really long time to be able to process that being white kind of fit the job description for being hired for Charlie in the same way that being attractive did. And that she hadn't connected the dots until after Me Too, that in a way, putting up with Charlie being Charlie was her accepting the racism that was at play, and that she didn't understand that at the time, whether it was because she didn't want to, or didn't have the narrative yet to understand that she had come around to that.
It is so complex. I mean, it really, every chapter that you write, there's so many different parts to it. It's almost like you read it and then you have to reread it again. I guess in a way, at the end, there was one question that I kept coming back to, because there was one other thing that I read, and it was a statistic about basically how HR training, where men are brought in for sexual harassment training, tends to backfire, right? Statistically, when they go back and think about whether or not it's been helpful, in fact, it's not helpful, because it makes people feel like they're being pigeonholed as something that they don't identify with. Yeah. And so immediately you go into those trainings and then those trainings don't work. So how do we, and this is, the basis of your book, but how do we as a culture move past and move forward from these things, identifying what has happened, and yet wanting, I think, everyone, and at least I know, wants to figure out a way through this in such a divided world?
It begins a lot with calling things out as we see it and talking about stuff incessantly. And it's the same thing that climate scientists say about getting people, on the bandwagon to care about climate change, is that you need to talk about it, and you need to talk about it whenever you can with as many people as possible. And now I recognize that sometimes we don't want to be that person who risks annoying other people when we go back to like, did that just happen? Or why did I do that? But to give ourselves the opportunity and those around us the opportunity to develop the self-awareness, right? And to do that while assuming the best of each other. And trusting that change can happen. And I talk a lot about narrative and cultural narratives and how powerful and impactful they are, right? And I think a lot of it starts with the stories that we tell ourselves, and the stories about our world and what we think is possible, and stories about women versus stories about men, stories about girls versus boys. Just really, we need stories about humans and everything in between, whatever, however you identify. Because, I cite in the conclusion, in Sweden, they have their gender neutral kindergarten programs that they've started. And the thing is, these children grow up and they don't fail to identify gender in people. Like they will quickly, label someone a woman or a man. The difference is that after going through these systems, these schools, they just are significantly less likely to make the same implicit biases that my children are inevitably going to make, or that I still make, right? And, I talk about, I also reference, the movie Barbie, like America Ferrera, like her tactic of just like talking about it to everybody it's what we should be doing. I also do, though, say that my one gripe with Barbie is that, I really love the movie, and it's not a gripe, but if something is false, because everything is so accurate in Barbie Land, but if something was false, is that a matriarchy is actually not the inverse of a patriarchy. That cultural anthropologists who have studied matriarchal societies will tell you, and I cite the work of Peggy Reeves Sanday, that it's not about top-down rule. It's about egalitarianism, and it's about complementing one another. So she talks about studying a tribe in West Sumatra, and how for years and years she was just asking the wrong questions about how they led their society and how they exerted power, because it was just so fundamentally different. So I guess what we're striving for is Barbie Land with a true matriarchy. Not actually.
And that's all.
Yeah. That's all.
And that's all. One final question for you. Mm-hmm. What are you telling your two sons? You have two boys, isn't that right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what are you telling them to ensure that at no point will they ever be featured in the follow-up to this book?
Yeah. So my oldest son is 8, and his brother is 5. And with the 8-year-old, we talk a lot about narratives. We talk a lot about the stories we read, movies he watches. I always interject when I think something, like I want his thoughts on something. I do the same with things that I believe are racist or unfortunate. There's always an opportunity, right? It's remarkable. And also when you have small children who ask you questions that are just so unreserved, right? And I was really, really proud of him when he has this program at school where, this was a year ago, they take out a book from the class library, they bring it home, and they need to answer some questions about it, and they take it back to school. And he closed his book one night while reading it, and he said, "Mommy, have you ever noticed that every book I bring home is about a boy?" And I was like, wow. Yeah, he's like, What does Gemma do? This is one of his best friends, Gemma. And I was like, well, I think she's stuck reading the same books you are. And he's like, but honestly, every book is about a boy. And then shortly after that, identified that every book is also a white boy, which I really appreciated. So I guess at this age, they're so young, I just try to take every opportunity I can to kind of digest the world with them and to understand their privilege and their place in the world and what their role is.
Well, I have no doubt that those lessons will be nothing but helpful over the course of their life because, as you said, it's all about calling it out, right? And so I would say to anyone who's listening, I like to always leave our listeners with a thought, but call it out the next time you hear it. Call it out the next time you see it. I think it's such an important thing, and it doesn't have to be done, and this is what I love so much about your book, it doesn't have to be done in this sort of like overly aggressive, angry way. It can also be done as this is what I see in front of me in a truth-telling way, which is very much the way that I read your book. So, Reah, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
So your book, as I've said before, Complicit, How Our Culture Enables Misbehaving Men, comes out June 18th of 2024. It's being published by Gallery Books. Is that correct? It's Simon & Schuster.
Yes.
So we are under the same imprint.
Yes, we are.
Wonderful, wonderful part of Simon & Schuster. So proud to be an author there, as I am sure you are too.
Yeah.
So where can we find you, other than obviously on every bookshelf possible?
Well, my Instagram account is Bravo Reah. And hopefully I will be more findable, as I have really enjoyed a rather private life up until now. But I know that
I feel like that is about to
gotta
change.
And it's also it's not part of the role. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your truth. Thank you for being brave for so many people who can't be. And thank you for joining me today on Claim Your Confidence.
Thank you for having me, Lydia.
Absolutely. And as I've said before, I'm Lydia Fenet. This is Claim Your Confidence at Newsstand Studios in Rockefeller Center. Thank you to Joe for always making everything so perfect. And also thank you for Tishman Speyer and Rockefeller Center for hosting us in this beautiful space. I look forward to being with you again next week. In the meantime, remember, call it out.